So thank you, Venerable Lekden, for coming all the way and teaching us. Today's teaching is on Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, after which we will be doing the Lamatsungkhapa Guru Yoga and soak offering. So please stay with us. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you.
For making the time.
Of course.
Despite your schedule, we know you have exams and other things.
No better place to be. So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let's take a moment to settle ourselves into our space. Whatever worldly affairs we have been busying ourselves with, we can put them aside and commit ourselves to our practice and our study of Dharma. Allow ourselves to be focused and diligent in our examination and our exploration of the teachings of the Buddha. We set a very strong motivation that the reason we've come together today on this holy day of Ganden Namche, Lamatsungkhapa Day, is to study the teachings, not merely for our own benefit, but so that we might be a maximum benefit to others. That we might advance on the path towards Buddhahood, develop wisdom and skillful means and methods that allow us to be of greater service to others. And that is the reason we engage in this study and this practice. So set that motivation firmly, and we will offer some preliminary prayers. So in the Golden Prayer Book, we can turn to page 34. And we'll offer first prayer, Refuge in Bodhicitta, 3 times in Tibetan, and then once in English. And then we'll continue the next 2 prayers in English. Sangye Chiran Soki Chonam La Jancho Pardo Dagni Kyabsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Jola Pencher Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chiran Soki Chonam La Jancho Pardo Dagni Kyabsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Jola Pencher Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chiran Soki Shonam La Jancho Bardo Dagni Kyabsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Chola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be inseparable. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Now I'll offer the short mandala offering. So when we are making a mandala offering, we visualize the entire universe. And in the text or the words of the mandala offering, it's the universe as understood by Indian and Tibetan cosmology, Mount Meru, surrounded by the 4 continents. But we visualize the entire universe, and in our mind we purify it to make it a place of beauty and exquisite delight, and we offer that to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And in making this vast, expansive offering of all of the cosmos, we request teachings from the teacher, and we also request the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So we'll offer this twice, once in Tibetan and once in English. Om Sa-shi-pi-ki Jo-shin-me-tok Tram-ri-ra-bling-shi Ni-den-gem-pandi Sange-shing-du Mi-te-u-ai Joku-naman-dak-shinga Ship-ai-yo. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hiram Guru Rana Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And we will continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts. To you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See, condition things as such. Through these merits, may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Thank you. So, I am very excited to be here today. Today is Lama Tsongkhapa Day, Ganden Namche, the 25th day of the 10th month of the Tibetan calendar. And it is the anniversary of the passing away of Lama Tsongkhapa. He passed away in 1419, according to the Western calendar. And so we celebrate this day as a celebration of our gurus in general, right? It's an opportunity to make offerings, whether they be light offerings or food offerings or whatever offerings we can do, and to celebrate the role of the guru in our practice and in our life. And so today, what we're doing here at the center is we will continue with our study of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva, which is what we normally do Sunday mornings. And we'll do that for half the time. And in place of a meditation, we're going to offer Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga, a condensed version of it. We won't do a long version, but we'll do a condensed version. And then we'll take a short break, and then we will offer Tsok, Lama Chopa Tsok, so Guru Puja as well. So it's going to be a full day. But luckily, the material we want to cover in Bodhisattva today, I think we can cover somewhat quickly. We're at a good place in the text. You know, when I think of Tsongkhapa, right, what I think of is the fact that Tsongkhapa was a reformer. He saw that the Dharma was kind of getting, partisan, very partisan. And he had teachers from all of the major lineages that existed at the time. At that time, the Nyingma, Kagyu, and Sakya had distinct lineages of practice and study and meditation. And he had gurus from all of those lineages. And he pulled together what he felt was, or what he understood to be, the proper understanding of the teachings of the Buddha from all those different sources. And so he viewed himself as the new Kadampa, right? If we talk about Atisha, when Atisha came to Tibet at the end of the 10th century as a reformer, and he started the Kadampa lineage, Tsongkhapa then fashioned himself as following directly in the footsteps of Atisha. And he was committed to integrating study and practice. And a lot of time, the students or disciples of Tsongkhapa get criticized for being more focused on study than on meditation. But the truth is, Tsongkhapa was an incredible meditator, and the way he teaches is in order to inspire our meditation and to constantly integrate study and practice, and to constantly be using meditation in order to churn through whatever we've been studying. So there is a focus on study, that's true, but it is not absent of meditation. The point is to integrate those two, and then to use that integration in our practice to then lead a meaningful life, which is true for all of the Buddhist lineages, right? But Tsongkhapa was especially powerful in the way he integrated. And you can see his influence. Obviously, now we celebrate most commonly the Lamrim tradition that he has spearheaded, though, of course, he was writing a commentary on Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment when he wrote the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise in the Path to Enlightenment. And, even with Atisha, that was not a new concept of reordering the Buddhist teachings into a sequence of meditative topics. What Atisha did that was uncommon was he divided it into the three scopes. And he recognized that these are the three different aims of Buddhist practitioners, and these are the different practices that align with those three different aims. And therefore, he created a sequential path. And that is what Tsongkhapa elaborated on. Now, even recognizing those three divisions isn't uncommon to Atisha. We'll see in our text today by Shantideva, who was 200 years before Atisha, that he also recognizes those three divisions, right? But Atisha was the first one to explicitly notice those three divisions and then pull out the Buddha's different topics of meditation and organize them in that way. And so Tsongkhapa, as that's what he's maybe most famous for, at least in the world right now, and among the average disciple, is the Lamrim Chenmo. But his texts are incredibly important, all of his texts. And we can look at his major texts. And in addition to the Lamrim Chenmo, the stages of the path to enlightenment, he has the stages of the path of Tantra, the Nakrim Chenmo, which is also incredibly important and detailed and extensive. And then he has Sertren, so the Golden Rosary of Eloquent Speech, which is a commentary on the Abhismaya Alamkara, teaching all of the Paramita teachings. And then he has Gompa Rapsel, clarifying the intent, which is a commentary on Madhyamaka, on Umalajupa, on engaging in the middle way, right? And then we have the whole scope of sutra covered in that, as well as tantra. And then he goes on with Rimna Seldrin, the lamp that Rimna Seldrin. So the lamp clarifying the 5 stages, which is a commentary on Guya Samaja practice, right? Guya Samaja really being considered the king of tantras explicitly. And so one of the 3 deities, tantric deities that are focused on in the Gelupa lineage, I mean, obviously, all the Buddhas, there are many different deities we can focus on, but Guya Samaja, Chakrasamvara, and Karasana, Sandhu, and Jigje, and Yamantaka. Those are the 3 that are most focused on in our lineage, but of those, Guya Samaja, even the text itself, the root tantra is the king of all tantras. And so Rimna Seldrin is his extensive commentary on that. And then aside from that, he has many prayers that we recite all the time. Lamso Namsum, the 3 principal aspects of the path, is phenomenal. And it's one of the places where you see Tsongkhapa in very short, terse ways, distinguishing himself in the relationship between dependent arising and emptiness, which was his presentation of that is uncommon. And even in that short verse, that short text, we see that. Then also the foundation of all good qualities, which is another short Lamrim text. His prayer to be reborn in Sukhavati. So you also see him having prayers that are devotional in aspect, so he covers the whole range. And then, of course, Tenjo Topa, in praise of interdependent arising, the prayer he supposedly spontaneously composed when he showed the aspect of realizing emptiness, right? And the reason I bring up all these texts is because we want our practice to mirror our gurus. And with Tsongkhapa being the head of our lineage, right? Tsongkhapa shows that practice isn't specific. Practice is broad and vast. We have to try to encompass all of the Dharma in our practice. Now, some of us may be more suited for one thing or another. That's true, right? But it doesn't mean we should neglect any parts of the Dharma. And so we see in Tsongkhapa's teaching and in his example through his life story how he learned from various different teachers. He didn't isolate different lineages and say, this is not true, this is true. He said, what in here is useful? What in here is accurate? And he has gurus from all the different lineages. He combined them, and his study was vast and broad. So we need to make our practice the same way. Now, of course, the Lamrim really is critical to our own study and practice because it's so clear and concise, and it gives us such a clear path to practice. And so incorporating Lamrim practice into everything we do is very useful. But when we think of Tsongkhapa, especially on a day like today, I think it's important to visualize. We can use the visualization or the concept that we get from Lama Chopa, right? So Lama Chopa, the Guru Puja, was mostly composed by Panchen Lobsang Chökyi Gyalten, the first Panchalama. And in it, the visualization is called Lama Lobsang Tupuan Dorje Chang, right? That's a visualization you do. So Lama, meaning your guru. Lobsang, standing for Lobsang Drakpa, who is Tsongkhapa. That's his given name. So it's your guru who's taken the aspect of Tsongkhapa. And then Tupuang. Tupuang is for Shakyamuni Buddha. So at Tsongkhapa's heart is Shakyamuni Buddha. And then Dorje Chang is at Shakyamuni's heart is Vajradhara, the essence of all tantras, right? So we see our guru in the form of Tsongkhapa. There's no division between our guru and whoever that may be, whether it be a living guru or guru who's passed away or its Holiness Dalai Lama, whatever guru we may have, there's no distinction between our own guru and Lama Tsongkhapa and Shakyamuni Buddha and Vajradhara. They're all combined into one being. So when we engage in practice, we should realize that there is this indivisibility between them, right? And then the last thing to say is just that we recognize Tsongkhapa as a manifestation of Manjushri. We say he was a living Buddha of wisdom, and that everything he did was a display for the benefit of students. Now, the other lineages don't agree with that. They say he was a great scholar, but they don't say he was Manjushri. That's an uncommon position we have as Gelupas, and that's fine. But the important thing is when we do our practice related to Manjushri, we recognize that Manjushri is the Buddha of wisdom. He holds a flaming sword that cuts through all of our ignorance and doubt. And so in the Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga, which we'll do today, many of the practices associated with that are also practices associated with Manjushri. So part of that practice is trying to generate the 7 different types of wisdom, right? And so I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to that practice, especially because we're going to do a very short version of it. but it's recognizing that wisdom is critical. And of course, wisdom, when we talk about wisdom or the perfection of wisdom, we say wisdom comes in two varieties, conventional and ultimate. And ultimate wisdom is the wisdom that recognizes the nature of reality, that understands emptiness. That's the most important. But conventional wisdom is also important, right? We can't neglect both worldly conventional wisdom and spiritual conventional wisdom are both necessary for our journey, right? If you only have emptiness and this understanding of emptiness, but you don't have bodhicitta and all of the vast path or the expansive path, then you won't become a bodhisattva. You won't be moving towards Buddhahood. You may get rid of your afflicted minds, right? Because the understanding emptiness gives you the power to do that, but it doesn't propel you towards Buddhahood. So we need both types of wisdom. And Tsongkhapa, as a manifestation of Manjushri, he is a combination or a display of both those types of wisdom, or embodiment, rather. Now, today, we're continuing with the Bodhicharyavatara, right? Which is a perfect text to study the combination of both wisdom and practice. Very famously, the last chapter, or the chapter before the dedication, so the 9th chapter, the chapter on wisdom, is very difficult to understand. It's written in a different format, a different style than the rest of the text. And if you look at the different lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, they interpret it differently. We all agree that Shantideva was Prasantaka Madhyamaka, but the different lineages have different understandings of what that means. So it's a very difficult chapter, but it's one of the most critical chapters to understanding wisdom. But for someone like me, I need a commentary. It's very difficult to understand without a commentary. Now, we're not there today. Today, we are on chapter 3. Last week, I believe we finished chapter 2. And so if we look at the outline of this text, of course, Shantideva himself, being an 8th century scholar who was from Nalanda Monastery, right? And the text itself is exploring what it means to live the life of Bodhisattva. And now we know the life of Bodhisattva is marked by the practice of the 6 perfections. That's how we tend to understand what it means to try to model our lives after that of Bodhisattva. So if we look at the chapters, of the 10 chapters, the first 3 are all about bodhicitta. So the first chapter is like an introduction to bodhicitta. And then the second and third chapters are under the heading of how to actualize bodhicitta through the practice of the 7-limb prayer. And then the 4th and the 5th chapters are about the perfection of morality. The 6th chapter is the perfection of patience. The 7th is the perfection of joyful effort or diligence. The 8th is the perfection of concentration. And the 9th is the perfection of wisdom. And then the last chapter is an extensive dedication, right? So you notice that we're missing the perfection of generosity. But that is included especially we'll see in the chapter 3 that we're studying today, part of this chapter talks about generosity. So we say the perfection of generosity is included with bodhicitta. But bodhicitta, these 3 chapters that come first are important because in order to actually enter into the Mahayana path, we have to have bodhicitta, right? Bodhicitta is our key. It's our entrance. And of course, we can talk about bodhicitta in many ways. We don't have a lot of time today, so I won't go too extensive, but it's important to recognize when we talk about bodhicitta, we talk about conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. Conventional bodhicitta is what we actually mean, for the most part, when we say bodhicitta, the awakening mind, the Mahayana awakening mind. It's the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, right? Or the aspiration and intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. Ultimate bodhicitta is the direct realization of emptiness in the mind of an Arya, a Mahayana Arya being, right? So it's called bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, but it's really a realization of emptiness. So you often see the phrase, we need to cultivate the 2 bodhicittas. That's what it's talking about, right? Now, within bodhicitta, we can talk about aspirational bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta. One is more of a wish and one is more of a practice. It's a very specific definition, but we don't have to worry about that for the most part. We can just recognize that bodhicitta has these different modes of being in our mind. Sometimes it is more active than others, right? There's a distinction. And then what's important for us to realize is that we have what's called effortless bodhicitta or unfabricated bodhicitta, and then effortful bodhicitta or fabricated bodhicitta. So for ordinary beings like ourselves, whatever baby taste of bodhicitta we have is what we would call fabricated bodhicitta or effortful Fabricated makes it seem like it's fake. It doesn't mean it's fake. It means that it takes us intent and effort, and that in our practice of meditation, we can have some sort of mind of bodhicitta, but it takes effort there. That's what it means by fabricated. Whereas as we cultivate that deeper and deeper and deeper, it takes less and less and less effort until it is effortless, and that's unfabricated. And once we achieve unfabricated bodhicitta, that is the bodhicitta that is actual, real bodhicitta that gains us entryway into the Mahayana paths, right? And gives us the quality of being a bodhisattva. And so for us to practice bodhicitta, even though we know we don't have genuine or complete bodhicitta, we still have something that approximates it, right? Often called bodhicitta that's like the bark of a sugarcane plant. In the same way that, the real flavor of the sugarcane plant is at its center, the bark still has some sweet taste because of its proximity, right? And so our bodhicitta has the flavor of actual bodhicitta. It's not quite there, but it has the taste of it, right? It reminds us of it. And this is valuable, right? We shouldn't be like, well, I'm not a real bodhisattva, therefore nothing's worth it. No, that's not the point, right? And we can think of how we develop bodhicitta. It's a combination. We start with compassion, the wish for other sentient beings to be free from all suffering. And then, generally we talk about two different types of compassion. There is so the type of compassion that wishes to be free from suffering, right? So that's the kind of compassion that exists in the continuum of even Hinayana beings. They have this type of compassion, right? That wishes for others to be free from suffering. But so compassion that wants to protect others, that is compassion that is in the minds of someone who is awakened into the Mahayana lineage, right? So it's not just that you want them to be free from suffering, but you recognize your role in helping free them from suffering. So when we talk about compassion, there are many different derivations of it, and it gets very technical. You have compassion, and then you have great compassion. Great compassion doesn't exist in the continuum of a Hinayana being, right? Only in the mind of a being who has awoken into the Mahayana lineage. So it doesn't mean that you're on a Mahayana path, but you've awoken into the Mahayana lineage. So you're preparing to enter the path. And in general, we say that it's great compassion because its object is great. It's not just any individual sentient being, but it's all sentient beings all the time, right? So it's limitless in that way. And then that moves on to what we call the special intention, but really we call that laksam in Tibetan or laksam ningje. So it's the compassion that has the special intention. So once you develop the mind of compassion that says, I wish all sentient beings could be free from suffering, then you develop the mind that says, it is my responsibility. I will free them from suffering. So that's the type of compassion that is this kyobdugi ninja, the compassion aspiring towards protection. That is the special intention. And then that develops not only into the intention, but then actual bodhicitta. I will become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings and free them from all suffering. So there's a progression of our practice, right? And so for us, we can realize every small moment of compassion we cultivate is moving in the right direction. Even if it isn't great compassion, even if it isn't expansive compassion that covers all sentient beings, every moment of compassion that we're able to actively cultivate brings us closer to Buddhahood. It brings us closer to actually realizing bodhicitta. And by realizing bodhicitta, it's our fast track to Buddhahood, right? And so we should have compassion as the motivating factor that guides everything we do, every moment of our life. And now often we say we should have a bodhicitta motivation, but bodhicitta motivation and a motivation of compassion overlap, right? So we should have both. But for many of us, compassion is easier in the moment sometimes because you don't have such a big view. You can just have a small, immediate view. So it's important to develop compassion so we can develop bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is the basis for practicing the six perfections. And this is true for a lot of Dharma topics. The six perfections of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom, they are based upon bodhicitta, but they also strengthen bodhicitta. So they work in both directions. The greater your bodhicitta, the more elaborate and innate your practice of the six perfections are. And the more you work to generate minds of these six perfections, the easier bodhicitta comes to you. So for people like us, who are ordinary beings who aren't on the path, we shouldn't just focus on bodhicitta and do the six perfections later, because the bodhicitta, because practicing the six perfections makes our mind of bodhicitta more natural and easier to come. But when we do meditation as just on bodhicitta, then on the other side, those six perfections come more naturally as well. So they reinforce each other, right? So that's why our practice needs to be expansive, because the more expansive our practice is, we realize how all the different pieces of the Dharma interconnect and reinforce each other to be a sum that's greater than the whole. I mean, to be a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts, rather. And so it's for that reason that we're studying this text. And that's the reason we're going to be engaging in the third chapter today. Now, I had hoped, we still have time, not a lot. I hope to go through this whole chapter today. Okay. The chapter is 34 verses, but it's very straightforward. And now, in the second and third chapters, it is how to actualize bodhicitta through the use of the seven limb prayer. And so, in the second chapter, we had already gone through the first few limbs of the seven limb prayer, right? In the first chapter, we went through the limbs of prostration, offering, and confession. So it's the first three limbs of the seven limb prayer. And then the final four limbs occur in this chapter. And then after those four limbs, we actually have the verses of realizing bodhicitta. And then we have verses of aspirational verses and generating joy of having realized bodhicitta. So that's what makes up this chapter. And so we've talked a lot in our classes, and since we don't have new people here attending today, I think it's okay to go through some of this quickly. But the heart of this chapter is going to be these limbs of rejoicing, requesting, beseeching, right? There's dedication as well, but we'll get to that in a moment. And so rejoicing is one of the most powerful types of activity we can do. And rejoicing is generating joy in virtuous activity, right? And what's interesting to me is rejoicing and joyful perseverance are very, very similar. When you look up the definition of joyful perseverance, it's generating joy at the result of virtue or at virtuous activity. It's very similar to rejoicing. Now, the difference is perseverance you need when the whatever activity you're doing is creating difficulties, you recognize the virtue from that activity, and that is what gives you the motivation and the endurance to keep going, right? So it's realizing that virtue is like a battery, right? It's having joy and virtue fills you up and lets you keep going. But that's what rejoicing is. The only slight difference is that rejoicing, you're not just rejoicing in virtuous activities, but you're rejoicing in people experiencing the fruition of virtuous activities as well. So in that way, rejoicing is a little more expansive. Like whenever someone achieves something or someone, receives something nice and they have happiness, you're rejoicing in their happiness, in their joy. So their happiness and joy may not itself be virtuous, but it is the fruition of some virtuous activity in the past, right? And so rejoicing in that way is a little more expansive. You're not just having joy at the object of virtue, but also at the fruits of virtue, right? Because you recognize that any joyful experience is the result of virtuous cause. And therefore, by rejoicing in the cause, you're rejoicing in by rejoicing in the result, you're rejoicing in the cause as well. So I'm not going to go too long on it today, simply because I wanted to go through this. But I think trying to meditate and contemplate the relationship between rejoicing, which Lama Zopa Rinpoche always emphasizes as really, really important, and the perfection of joyful perseverance. I think it's a really interesting connection that when you look at the definition, how they're essentially the same thing. And so then when you're having difficulty in your meditation practice or in your study, or you have these obstacles where you just want to give up a little bit, right? Which we all have, think about the fact that rejoicing, we think of rejoicing and we talk about it as the antidote to jealousy, right? When you see other people achieving nice things, especially people maybe achieving the things that you think you deserve, by rejoicing in that, you are not creating any space for there to be jealousy in your mind. That's true. Rejoicing is one of the prime antidotes to jealousy, but it also is a type of generating perseverance. So I think that connection is something that's worth thinking about. So with that, let's go through the verses on rejoicing in our text and see if there's anything else you want to talk about. So on chapter 3, the first 4 verses are verses of rejoicing, right? So, gladly do I rejoice in the virtue that relieves the misery of all those in unfortunate states, and that gives happiness to those suffering. I rejoice in that gathering of virtue that is the cause for the Arhat's awakening. I rejoice in the definite freedom of embodied creatures from the miseries of cyclic existence. I rejoice in the awakening of the Buddhas, and also in the spiritual levels of their children. And with gladness, I rejoice in the ocean of virtue for developing an awakening mind that wishes all beings to be happy, as well as in the deeds that bring them benefit. Right. Now, I will say, we're using Stephen Batchelor's translation here. It's not my favorite translation. That's okay. We'll work with it. Now, looking at those 4 verses of rejoicing, what do you notice about them? This is something I mentioned. Exactly. Those verses are showing us the Lam Rim scopes. So the first verse, so what are the 3 Lam Rim scopes? We have the scopes of the small scope, medium scope, and great scope, right? And these are all valid types of Buddhist practice. But so the aims of the scopes are different. And therefore, the practices that are common to those scopes are different. So the small scope is the wish for a positive rebirth, right? Allow you to continue practicing Dharma. So rebirth as a human or a god. And so you see in this first verse, it's referencing them. Be free of unfortunate states. The unfortunate states are all the 3 lower rebirths of a hungry ghost, animal, and a hell being. So the first is rejoicing in all those beings who have achieved the goal of the small scope, which is to have a fortunate rebirth. And then the second verse is the medium scope. So not only is the goal of the medium scope is not simply to be free of the lower realms, but to be free from samsara entirely. So that is the 2 Hinayana paths of the Shravaka and the Pratyeka Buddha, right? And so here it says the Arhat's awakening, the definite freedom. So that would be freedom from samsara for all living beings or all sentient beings from psychic existence. So here we're rejoicing in all those beings who have achieved the result of Arhat, of a Hinayana Arhat, right? Shravaka Arhat or Pratyeka Buddha Arhat. So that's the medium scope. And then the great scope is the wish not for oneself simply to be free from samsara, but to achieve Buddhahood, which allows you to then free all sentient beings from samsara. And that is these 3rd and 4th verses. So even though, as I mentioned, Atisha was the first one to really create this Lam Rim situation, or this Lam Rim paradigm that uses the 3 scopes, 200 years before Atisha, we see Shantideva very clearly delineating those 3 motivations, right? So you see how all these different great teachers take from what has come before them to put it in a way that's useful for the students in front of them. And we can see that in our contemporary teachers as well, right? So these are the 4 verses on rejoicing. And I don't think that we need to say much more about them here. Except that in the last verse, right, we say, with gladness I rejoice in the ocean of virtue for developing an awakening mind, for developing bodhicitta, that wishes all beings to be happy, as well in the deeds that bring them benefit. So we're not just generating virtue in those beings who've realized bodhicitta, but as well as all their activities, right? Everything they do that brings about benefit to sentient beings.
So does it mean aspiring?
Yeah, so here it means both aspiring and engaging, right? And it's pointing at both of them. Really, the definition of engaging bodhicitta is bodhicitta that is manifest in the continuum of a bodhisattva or a Buddha, of a Mahayana path being, who that is simultaneously concurrent or directly concurrent with the practice of the perfections. So what that means is there's different ways of being concurrent, right? So when you have bodhicitta that is manifest at the same time as any of the practice of the perfections are manifest, they're both simultaneously manifest in your continuum. That is actually engaged bodhicitta. Whereas, for instance, a bodhisattva, an Arya bodhisattva, who is engaged in meditative equipoise and emptiness, their bodhicitta is no longer manifest because the only mind they have manifest at that time is their realization of emptiness. So their bodhicitta is, how do you say, bhagyanyawa. It's not subsequent. It's simultaneous, but it's not manifest. It's subdued, right? I can't think of the word in English, bhagyanyawa in Tibetan, but it's subdued. It's not manifest, right? It's sublimated. And so that bodhicitta that is dormant, yeah. You could say dormant. It exists as a mind of bodhicitta, but it isn't manifest in their mind, right? It's dormant or it's sublimated. So that would be aspiring bodhicitta in the mind of an Arya bodhisattva, right? And then as soon as they leave their meditative equipoise, then their practice of the 6 perfections and their bodhicitta are simultaneously manifest. That's engaged bodhicitta, like that. That's the real definition for beings on the path, of bodhisattvas. For us, we can think of aspiring and engage with our fabricated bodhicitta. The way we think of it is the wish to do something and actually doing that thing. The example you see in a lot of texts is the wish to go to the store and then actually walking to the store, right? That's the difference in our minds. But for actual bodhicitta, the difference is a little more subtle, right? But here we're generating we're rejoicing at both of those. So then we have one verse requesting, and we have one verse beseeching. And so requesting is requesting for the teachers to teach the Dharma, to continue turning the wheel of Dharma. And beseeching is requesting them to not enter into parinirvana, but to stay until samsara is empty, right? And so we can read those two verses quickly. With folded hands, I beseech the Buddhas of all the directions to shine the lamp of Dharma for all bewildered in misery's gloom. With folded hands, I beseech the conquerors who wish to pass away, please remain for countless eons and to not leave the world in darkness. So, the importance of doing these things, right, of making these requests, the importance is because the Buddhas aren't omnipotent, right? Buddhas are omniscient, but they're not omnipotent. So Buddhas rely on the proper conditions to teach. And so by making these requests for the Buddhas to continually teach, or for our teachers to continually teach, and to remain a long time, what we're doing is creating conditions for us to realize the paths in our continuum, for us to engage the scriptures and realizations in our continuum, but also the conditions for Buddhas to continue teaching, and to be in the presence of disciples that are appropriate disciples for receiving the teachings, right? So it's important, these requests and the request and beseeching. Important for our own minds to bring us closer to our gurus and closer to Dharma itself, but it's also important to create the conditions for there actually to be teachings that exist. Because the Buddhas aren't omnipotent, right? I mean, a Buddha can travel anywhere they want and teach at any time, but if the conditions aren't appropriate, that teaching won't be of any benefit. So what we're doing is creating conditions for teachings to actually take root in the minds of sentient beings. And you'll notice in the Ganden Lagema, the Prayasa Tsongkhapa, which I suppose we're going to get to quickly, it's a seven-limb prayer. Ganden Lagema itself has one verse of invocation where you're inviting Tsongkhapa to the space in front of you, and then you're going through the seven limbs, because the seven limbs constitute a complete practice, right? A whole practice that brings us towards bodhicitta. But in that seven-limb prayer, the beseeching, requesting them to live long, is put first. So it's not in the same order as we usually have the seven-limb prayer. And that's because it is a prayer that is a guru yoga focused on developing closeness to the guru. So the very first verse is not prostrations. The first verse is invocation. But after that, the first verse of the seven limbs is requesting them to live a long time, because that brings you closer to the guru. So both of these are quite important, but they're also short verses. We don't have to spend too much longer on them. And then lastly, of the seven limbs, we have the limb of dedication. And so that is verses 7 through 10. Verse 7 itself being a general dedication, and 8, 9, and 10 being a little more specific. So, thus, by the virtue collected through all that I have done, may the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor, the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. So what does that mean, right? This means may I be the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. When we see the doctor, medicine, and nurse, that's the analogy we're having of the three jewels of refuge. So may my practice of bodhicitta and may my practice of the Dharma allow me to realize the three jewels in my continuum for the benefit of other sentient beings. May a rain of food and drink descend to clear away the pain of thirst and hunger, and during the eon of famine, may I myself change into food and drink. May I become an inexhaustible treasure for those who are poor and destitute, and may I turn into all things that they could need and be placed close beside them. So in this dedication, it's recognizing that through my practice, may I serve all sentient beings in the way they need to be served. And that continues with the further prayers. And you also see when you get to the 10th chapter, the dedication chapter, it's all verses like this. It's all about how can I be whatever is needed in any circumstance to bring worldly and super worldly benefit to other sentient beings. And so I do want to get to Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga. So I'm going to go through the rest of these verses quickly because I think that they're very straightforward. But we should say that the next verses are about how to train the mind in generosity. So we talked about generosity, the perfection of generosity, not having its own chapter. Here is where we see it most explicitly included. So verses 11 and 12 are how to train the mind in generosity. And in generosity here, we mean giving away both the body as well as all possessions or wealth, as well as all of our roots of virtue. So how can we train the generosity of all of those things? And then up to the first half of verse 15, we have, once we have created a mind that wants to give, how do we actually go about practicing them? And so those verses are a little bit difficult. How do you practice once you've given away the body? So we might talk about those a little bit, but let's go through them first. Without any sense of loss, I should give up my body and my enjoyments, as well as my virtues of all the three times, for the sake of benefiting all. By giving up all, sorrow is transcended, and my mind will realize the sorrowless state. Now, this translation in Stephen Batchelor's text is not very useful. So the better translation of these next two lines goes, as everything has to be given away, it is best to give it to all sentient beings. So this verse is helping us realize that we should not have attachment to our body or to our wealth. We shouldn't have attachment to samsara, right? By giving it all up, sorrow is transcended. It is through giving up not our bodies, but giving up attachment to our bodies, giving up attachment to our wealth, to our possessions. That's how we transcend samsara, right? So the act of giving something away without having given away your attachment to it is very difficult. So the most important thing for us is to give up the attachment first, right? And as everything has to be given away, it means at the time of death, everything will be discarded, whether we want it or not. So instead of waiting until the time of death and giving it away by accident, we should take the moment now to give away everything we can in active benefit of other sentient beings. Now, how to practice giving away your body. This is the difficult part of these 2.5 verses. Having given this body up for the pleasure of all living beings, by killing, abusing, and beating it, may they always do as they please. Although they may play with my body and make it a source of jest and reproach, because I have given it up to them, what is the use of holding it dear? Therefore, I shall let them do anything to it that does not cause them harm. Right? This is a hard kind of verse to rationalize. The way we think about this is not to say, should I put my body in a situation where others can abuse it? But it's recognizing that if I have no attachment to my body, it shouldn't matter to me any of these things that happen. Now, obviously, we don't want to be the source of others creating negative karma. So we shouldn't put ourselves in harm's way. We shouldn't intentionally provoke people and say, use my body however you want. Because the last here is most important, that does not cause them harm, right? So we shouldn't use our body intentionally in a way that could then precipitate others engaging in negative actions. However, when we find ourselves, if we were to find ourselves in a place where we're being abused, either verbally abused, physically abused, like that, our attachment to our body and to our wealth and to our possessions should be so non-existent that it shouldn't bother us. We shouldn't seek out those circumstances, but if they were to arise, a bodhisattva would not be upset by them. So what this verse is saying is not go seek out danger, but it's saying you should realize the amount of generosity of your body, virtue, and wealth that you've given away, the level of generosity you've actually able to achieve in your mind. If you can be in a scenario where you are physically or verbally abused or you have your possessions stolen and it doesn't disturb you at all. So if you can visualize or experience in your mind, imagine that you've reached that level, then that's actual generosity of giving away your body. But if you can't imagine being in that scenario, it means we still have more work to do. So this verse is giving us, these 2.5 verses are saying, what should we use as our measure, right? But it's not advocating that we go seek out dangerous situations. Does that make sense?
That is hard to achieve, I think.
Yeah, it's very hard to achieve, which this comes up a little bit later, but it says we have to practice in stages, right? That's one of the last verses. We practice in stages because we can't give away our body right now. That's not where we are. Our practice isn't there. So we don't jump to the most extreme goal. We realize that it's a graded path that we do slowly to the best of our ability. And the more we practice, the stronger our abilities become and the easier certain things become, right? So our practice, we look at the Bodhisattva's practice as the ideal that we're aiming for, recognizing we haven't achieved that yet. they generally say that even a bodhisattva who has not achieved the direct realization of emptiness isn't able to give away their actual body, for the benefit of others. So we definitely aren't there yet. But that's our aspiration, to have a mind that is so full of generosity, that is so free of attachment, that we wouldn't have any disturbance if our body is abused by others, because we don't have any grip on it. So we're not there, but we see that as aspirational. Okay. And so I do want to do Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga today. We're going to do a very abbreviated version. I'd like to finish this chapter. And the reason I want to finish this chapter is because we're having a winter break after this. And so then when we come back from break, we can jump right into the perfection of morality with the fourth chapter. And this chapter, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to go through the rest of the verses quickly, but we can bring up doubts as we go. So then from the second half of verse 15 all the way through verse 22 are aspirational prayers. Okay. So these go along with the idea of generosity, but also with the idea of bodhicitta. They're pushing us, saying, how can I be of service to others, right? How can I make sure others experience both worldly happiness and otherworldly happiness? Whenever anyone encounters me, may it never be meaningless for them, right? May I touch every sentient being whose path I cross, rather. If those who encounter me, if in those who encounter me a faithful or an angry thought arises, may that eternally be the source for fulfilling their wishes, right? This isn't saying I want everyone to love me. It's saying I want everyone to experience benefit from me in whatever way is necessary. May all who say bad things to me or cause me any other harm, may those who mock me and insult me have the fortune to fully awaken, right? This is going to the idea of immeasurable equanimity, right? Recognizing that all sentient beings deserve to be happy and deserve to be Buddhas, regardless of how they treat us. So our wish for others to be free from suffering isn't partisan. We don't only wish the people we like to be free from suffering. This is saying, may all sentient beings, regardless of how they harm me, achieve Buddhahood. And the reason we wish this is because that is how to open our minds. The more open minds we have, the happier we're going to be in this life. The more contentment we're going to have in this life. The less attachment we have to our bodies and to our possessions, the easier it is to go about this life with a mind that isn't disturbed. It doesn't mean our external circumstances are going to be easier, but our way of relating to those circumstances will be easier, right? May I be a protector for those without one, a guide for all travelers on the way. May I be a bridge, a boat, and a ship for all those who wish to cross the water. May I be an island for those who seek one, and a lamp for those desiring light. May I be a bed for all those who wish to rest, and a slave for all who want to have a slave. May I be a wishing jewel, a magic vase, powerful mantras, and great medicine. May I be a wish-fulfilling tree and a cow of plenty for the world. Just like space and the great elements, such as earth, may I always support the lives of all boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I, which is to say, until they themselves are freed from samsara, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. So here, these verses are just showing, may I, in my body, in my practice, in my mind, fulfill every single need of all sentient beings, regardless of how diverse those needs are, right? We talk about trying to develop bodhicitta. One of the critical steps, if we look at the different types of meditation, is that comes from this text from Shantideva, is the exchange of self and others, which is to say we replace our self-cherishing mind with a mind that cherishes others more than ourselves. These verses are pointing toward that. How can everything I do be for the benefit of others? And the reason we do that isn't because, we have this, mind of like abusing ourselves or a mind of saying we aren't important. It's recognizing that developing a mind always focused on others is the best way to achieve happiness in this life and in all future lives. So those are what are called the aspirational prayers. And now the next two verses are the actual verses of generating bodhicitta. And so we can read those. Just as the previous Sugatas gave birth to an awakening mind, and just as they successively dwelt in the Bodhisattva practices, likewise, for the sake of all that lives, do I give birth to an awakening mind, and likewise shall I too successively follow the practices. Now, if you follow Gyalten commentary is one of the most common ones we use for this text, and also the advice of His Holiness Dalai Lama. One way to give Bodhisattva vows, or to renew your Bodhisattva vows, is you first recite the verses 18 through 22 as a way of preparing yourself. And then verses 23 and 24, you recite 3 times, but you precede them first with the line, "May all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Gurus please pay attention to me." And then you recite these 2 verses 3 times. And then you recite the rest of this chapter as a way to generate joy and to solidify your practice. And we don't have time to renew our Bodhisattva vows today. Most often, the way we advise renewing the Bodhisattva vows is with that 14-line prayer, which is what we recite, many of us recite 3 times every day. This is another way to do it. It's interesting. The way you can grant Bodhisattva vows and renew them is very, very varied. I thought there was like one ritual, but I've seen numerous lamas just do numerous things. I translated Nick Rebush, who's in charge of the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, sent me a recording of Lama Zopa Rinpoche giving Bodhisattva vows. Was it Lama Zopa? No, it was Lama Yeshe giving Bodhisattva vows. And he said, "Can you translate what this text is that he's giving for Bodhisattva vows so we can transcribe it?" And I listened to it, and he was using verses from the 6th section Guru Yoga. That he just pulled out maybe 3 or 4 verses, I don't remember, but he used those as the verses to generate bodhicitta and to generate the bodhisattva vows. So there's many different ways we can generate bodhisattva vows, right? So this is a really powerful one that connects us to the Indian tradition, the Nalanda tradition, and to Shantideva, who embodies what it means to live life as a bodhisattva. So it's very powerful.
These are in Guru Yoga.
Yeah, exactly. So you see a lot of these verses get repeated other places, right? And so now we will just finish this chapter. The remaining verses are how to cultivate joy. And so from 25 to 28 are cultivating joy that's focused on oneself. And from 29 onward is cultivating joy focused on others. Okay. In order to further increase it from now on, those with discernment who have lucidly seized an awakening mind in this way should highly praise it in the following manner. Today my life has borne fruit. Having well obtained this human existence, I've been born into the family of Buddha, and now I am one of Buddha's children, right? So when we talk about, the big answer, what's the meaning of life? The meaning of life is to be a good-hearted person, which is to work towards bodhicitta. And that's what this is saying. Now that I've actually achieved bodhicitta, or I've taken bodhisattva vows, I've oriented myself towards Buddhahood, I've made my life meaningful, right? That is how I've made my life important. I've done something. Now, it doesn't mean I've achieved bodhicitta, but I've oriented myself in that direction, right? So that's an opportunity and a reason to generate a mind of joy. Thus, whatever actions I do from now on must be in accord with that family, the family of the Buddha, right? Never shall I disgrace or pollute the noble and unsullied race. And here, race doesn't mean an ethnic thing, but it means a lineage of the practitioners of the Buddha, right? Just like a blind man discovering a jewel in a heap of rubbish, likewise, by some coincidence, an awakening mind has been born within me. Now, of course, this isn't really a coincidence, right? We've done the work. We have to do the work to achieve bodhicitta. What this is showing is how incredibly rare and difficult it is. Not to achieve bodhicitta, but even to have a mind that wishes to achieve bodhicitta. If we think of all the sentient beings that exist in the world right now, never mind in the past or the future, right now, even if we just think of humans, how many humans are there on Earth, right? 8 trillion, right? Give or take. Of those 8 trillion, how many of them have committed themselves to practicing a spiritual path? Then of those, how many of them have committed themselves to practicing Buddhism? Then how many have found Mahayana Buddhism? And how many have actually turned their mind toward generating bodhicitta for the benefit of all sentient beings? That number is incredibly few. There are so many causes and conditions that have to come together for us to achieve that. And that's not even counting all of the sentient beings that aren't humans, right? So it's incredibly rare, like a blind person accidentally finding a jewel in a heap of rubbish. That's how rare it is, that we have oriented our lives towards bodhicitta. Never mind that we're actually trying to walk that path. So those are verses of cultivating joy aimed at oneself. And then the remainder of the chapter is about cultivating joy aimed at others. It is the supreme ambrosia that overcomes the sovereignty of death. It is the inexhaustible treasure that eliminates all poverty in the world. It is the supreme medicine that quells the world's disease. It is the tree that shelters all beings, wandering and tired on the path of conditioned existence. It is the universal bridge that leads us to freedom from unhappy states of birth. It is the dawning moon of the mind that dispels the torment of disturbing conceptions. It is the great sun that finally removes the misty ignorance of the world. It is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of Dharma. For all those guests traveling on the path of conditioned existence, which is to say all samsaric beings, who wish to experience the bounties of happiness, this will satisfy them with joy and actually place them in supreme bliss. Our developing a mind of bodhicitta is how we benefit other sentient beings. It's how other sentient beings can actually achieve happiness that is more than just the worldly happiness, right? It is through our practice of bodhicitta. Today, in the presence of all the protectors, I invite the world to be guests at a festival of temporary and ultimate delight. May gods, demigods, and all be joyful. So this verse concludes how to actualize bodhicitta through the practice of the seven limbs. And it concludes with engaging in generating bodhicitta in your mind through those two verses, and then generating joy in that bodhicitta. Right? Supreme ambrosia, they talk about like it's like a nectar, like the nectar of the gods. Let me say amrita, yeah. So it's amrita is most likely. Well, amrita is the ambrosia of deathlessness. So there are other types of ambrosia as well, but that's what it means. Usually the elixir of the gods, of 100 beautiful tastes simultaneously. So I know I rushed through this chapter, but the reason is we've talked so much about the seven limb prayers. We do it quite often and again in our classes. And we don't have a lot of new students today. And I guarantee that we're going to continue talking about seven limb prayers in the future. And so I thought ending this complete chapter today is a good break for us for when we come back. Now, I did take about 15 minutes longer than I wanted. I still want to do the Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga, but before I do that, are there any questions about this chapter or about the seven limb prayers or about how the seven limb prayers are a way to actualize bodhicitta or anything else before we continue?
So what exactly does it mean by overcomes death?
We overcome death because by becoming Buddhas, we no longer are trapped by our karma and delusions to be cycling in samsara again and again, right? So to overcome death means we're no longer basically overcoming samsara. We're no longer trapped by the karmic and the waves of karma and delusion that propel us from birth to death over and over again. Samsaric beings are the ones that are endowed with the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death, right? Once you escape samsara, you no longer die in that way. You have gone beyond death.
Yeah. So for someone who is generated bodhicitta, does it continue in their continuum?
If so, someone who's generated bodhicitta, what?
Does it continue their continuum?
Yeah. So once you generate bodhicitta, then they say that there are until you reach. So once you generate bodhicitta, you enter into the Mahayana path of accumulation, right? And then when you enter into the Mahayana path of accumulation, there are 3 levels of it. When you reach the 3rd level, your bodhicitta is unassailable. You can never degenerate, right? So until then, it can degenerate. But once you reach that level of bodhicitta, then you'll always have bodhicitta in your continuum. So when a bodhisattva passes away, even if they haven't become an Arya, so they haven't overcome their afflictions, right? And they haven't realized emptiness directly, that bodhicitta is still present in them, and they're reborn into their next life already with a mind of bodhicitta. So it continues through their practice in that way.
So on the highest path.
So on the highest path.
Of the human, like
yeah.
On the small and medium.
Well, on the small and medium, it is also possible, but we can't say with definite. Guaranteed. Yeah, it's not guaranteed because it is possible for your bodhicitta to devolve. But it's uncommon. It's more the way it's usually taught is those beings whose bodhicitta would degenerate are beings who were first on Hinayana paths and then entered the Mahayana path. And therefore, they already have a mind of, they've already been free from samsara themselves, but they've tasted the bliss of nirvana. And therefore, their mind wishing to cherish others more than themselves isn't quite as strong. And so that is how it's possible for their bodhicitta to degenerate. It's less common for someone who directly enters the Mahayana path to then degenerate. It's possible, but it's less common. Right? Any other questions? I feel like I'm a racehorse going through this so quickly. But these first chapters, especially, they're very straightforward, which is one of the beautiful things about this text, is that you don't have to be a great scholar to get a lot of meaning from this text. Now, again, the ninth chapter, that's hard. But up until there, it's pretty straightforward advice. And it's written in such a way that, yes, there are little details. Like if you weren't aware of the three scopes, you may not have pulled that out from those first 4 verses of rejoicing. But since you've already studied, you can see how he inserts those. So there is more depth to it the more you study. But even on a surface level, it's pretty easy to understand the meaning, right? So for that reason, I think it's okay to go quickly through these verses. So let us quickly